mentioned schemas, or stereotype theory, we talked about schemas. We'll revisit it again and break it down even further. We'll talk about the automatic control processing of stereotypes. And finally, we'll end on what should be a positive note. How can we reduce prejudice and discrimination? So for those of you who have seen that brown-eyed, blue-eyed demonstration, does anyone want to briefly describe it? Talk about what Jane Elliott, a second grade teacher, did and what happened to those students.
Basically, she split the class into brown-eyed and blue-eyed students, and did a demonstration basically to demonstrate that, racism is wrong and how it affects people. And one day she told the blue-eyed people that they're better than the brown-eyed people. She's like, you're better than them. Brown-eyed people are stupid and they're lazy and they don't do anything. And she told them all these terrible things, and they're like, hey, you're better than them because you're blue-eyed people. So you're automatically smarter and better and all this other stuff. And what they found was that the blue-eyed people, even if they were best friends with a brown-eyed person, would then be so mean to them. They would avoid them and they recess even, they would mean to them. And then the next day, she did the other direction and said the brown-eyed people are better than blue-eyed people. So it kind of both directions. And even though they had been to certain things already, they still found the same things, but they're still going to be mean. And even though you think they would empathize, but they didn't as much. So no matter what, you're told you're better than them and they're stupid and lazy, then
Exactly. Again, just creating social categories based on something that should be arbitrary. Like eyeball. Of course, she was demonstrating how something like ethnicity should be arbitrary. And again, we still find this connection.
She also did a test with them, they shouldn't sort of pick a car or something like that. And she found out that when the blue eyes were it was their day, they're better, they perform faster than the brown eyes.
Right? So it literally had effects on their cognition. When they were in that discriminated against group, they were literally performing worse on this test of cognition than when they were in this when they were in the superior group. And we'll actually talk about research that suggests why that might be happening.
Well, she also put the collars on, and little kids came back from recess, and one of them was brown and was punched in the eye. So I was like, why did you do that? And he was like, I don't know. They would have made no idea why they grabbed me that way.
That's one of my favorite little moments. Hit in the gut. It was so sad. Absolutely, right? So, she tried to get them to understand why they were behaving in the way that they were behaving. It was because he called me brown eyes. I'm just like, well, you had brown eyes yesterday. It didn't bother you yesterday. So it's trying to really get them to understand what was going on here. But absolutely. So it turned out, again, something as arbitrary as eye color was enough to create prejudice and discrimination, or to create latent hostility.
Well, when we were seeing it, was it just like a teacher doing this? Like the parents wanted
This was back in the 1970s. It was just after Martin Luther King Jr. had assassinated, and so this teacher really felt passionately about teaching her students about prejudice and discrimination. And so she did this exercise. Of course, it's not true experiments. You don't need IRB approval or anything like that. And arguably, it's questionably ethical. These kids were in clear distress for the entire day. I will say at the end of the experiment, they were very happy. She reunited them with their friends. They were singing. One was even crying with happiness, basically, to be reunited with her friends. It was emotional. And they actually brought those students back in years later and interviewed them. And they said that it was an extremely positive experience, that they have taken this with them in their own interactions with people of different ethnicities. And so it seems to have been positive. That said, questionably ethical and arguably, and back to the 70s.
don't they do workshops about that now? Where they do workplaces they bring in people who couldn't say anything?
Absolutely. And I believe Jane Elliott runs some of those with adults.
I saw there's a video for the other one. It's pretty funny how she just rides these adults.
Yeah. I could imagine that not being pleasant for them, but perhaps more excited about, to the detriment of the other group of kids, right? But one question is, do we even need that form of explicit instructions to really exhibit prejudice and discrimination? Or do these groups need to be meaningful in any way? What do you guys think? Apparently there weren't any. Maybe she
No,
stole them away.
I think she's through.
Did she? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I remember talking to her. She's like, oh, you're green, that's what you're grandma.
Well, your brown eye today. Interesting. Well, what this really is demonstrating. Oh, here we got one little kid. She's very sad. Yes. She's wearing the collar, so they would put the collars on them so they could identify their eye color from far away. So, what this obviously demonstrates is powerful inward bias. This we have, regardless of what group we're talking about. It doesn't turn out to matter whether or not this group is really important. We still, it turns out, demonstrate inward bias, even for our completely meaningless groups. So what is it? It's simply positive feelings and special treatment toward our own in-group members, and consequently negative feelings and unfair treatment toward our out-group members. And I think the brown eye, blue eye study clearly demonstrated that. But one question is that we should discuss: why does this happen? Why do you suppose we do this? Why do we have this inward bias and this outward bias? Why do we prefer and treat our own groups preferably?
We see them as being like us, and so we want to believe that like we're good, we're the best. So if we positively treat our people who are like us, then it reflects on us also.
Absolutely. So self-esteem, evolutionarily, it could be like protection. And there are arguments from an evolutionary basis that maybe we're sort of predisposed to form prejudices and positive associations with our own group members and negative with other group members, and maybe there's some advantage for doing that. You could certainly make an argument that familiarity, right, is going to increase, or to the extent that I'm helping people who are similar to me, I'm helping people who might have my similar genes, right? Again, sort of similar evolutionary psych perspective. Yeah, that's a good argument. So it could be not only this self-esteem approach, it could also be from an evolutionary psych perspective that we find this. We do, however, have good evidence that at least some of this is a product of motivations to enhance our own self-esteem, right? It turns out we can enhance our own self-esteem by viewing our own group as superior and the other group as inferior. It makes us feel better if we can believe this. So to the extent that we do believe these things, it makes sense that we would treat that group accordingly, treat that group preferably, treat the other group less preferably. And we do have evidence for this. I was, in fact, trying to figure out if this was going on here on campus. One study, for instance, found that students at college campuses will wear college paraphernalia representing their own college significantly more frequently after their team had won a game than after their team had not won a game. So I was looking around on Monday to see if I could see, I don't know if you guys noticed this happening here at UE, because we just won a pretty good game. State. Did we just lose again? Okay, never mind.
I really think it depends on like how well the school is. And I know when I go to the really small camp, like really small school, you work for yourself, but all the kids are from the zoo, which is like considered a state school. They're all wearing like they're gonna be wearing zoo pants, shirt, and hat.
Well, sure. And probably that does depend on the extent to which people are super excited about that particular sports team. Now, I went to Ohio State as an undergraduate. It's very, football-oriented school, so definitely lots of OSU going around. But I would say that this could possibly explain a lot of phenomena. For instance, maybe the Ku Klux Klan have particular low self-esteem. Maybe that's why they need to convince themselves that their own ethnicity is so much superior, right? But again, we can see this, I think, for sports teams. People sometimes really get into sports, really get excited when their team wins. It's not as if you're necessarily, but because you affiliate yourself with that team. You know, have any big sports fans here? A couple of sports fans? You guys find yourself feeling sort of sad if your team loses and this sort of diminished, even maybe self-worth, almost like, oh, it's so depressing. Probably because we associate them with our own group. They're part of our own group in that sense. But I will say, it turns out there's really fun research that shows we don't need these groups to be important. Arguably, maybe sports teams are important. Right? Maybe you were raised in a family where you rooted for this team, whether you want to or not, right? So maybe that is important to you, right? Your identity. But a question is, will we still find an in-group outgroup bias under situations where there really shouldn't be any meaningful association with this group? This group shouldn't be important to my own identity. And in fact, we do find evidence for this. Hodgwell, for instance, conducted a series of what we call minimal groups types of experiments. So here what would happen is participants would be brought into the lab and they would be asked to do something trivial, like flip a coin. So the results of a random coin toss put them into either group X or group W. Heads, you're in group X, tails, you're in group W. Okay? So this is totally random. Or another type of minimal groups type of experiment. Participants would be brought into the lab. They'd be asked to evaluate a series of paintings and indicate their preference for these paintings. After they were done evaluating those paintings, they were randomly assigned to either be told that, oh, according to your preferences, you prefer play style or you prefer tendency style art. These, of course, are made-up things, and it didn't matter what they actually rated in terms of the paintings. They were just put into these groups arbitrarily. Is this making sense? So we randomly assign them to arbitrary groups. Afterwards, we tell them, you're going to be participating, you're going to be meeting with, well, you're a fellow participant. Before you do, you've already sort of seen these people. You haven't really interacted with them much, but they were participating in this study with you. We would like you to rate them on a series of characteristics. And of course, they're told that they're in a different group from them, right? So if they're in the play style group, these other people are in the tendency style group. If they're in group X, these other people are in group W. And what we find, lo and behold, is that despite no interaction with these people, participants rated as members of their in-group versus the members of the out-group, so again, in-group versus out-group, as more likely, as having more pleasant personalities. They were asked to evaluate this work that they had done. Again, regardless of the actual quality of the work, which was always held constant, they evaluated people in their own in-group as having done better work than people in their out-group. And what's funny is they actually gave more money to their own in-group members than to their own out-group members. And they did this in arguably hostile and cutthroat ways. So for instance, if they were in a situation where they're told, you can get, let's see, how did this work? You have two choices, one of two choices. If you decide to give $1, you could either get $1 or you could get $2. The difference is, if the out-group member would get more, they would actually choose to give themselves less money than if the out-group member would get less, right? So they'd actually choose to hurt themselves and accept less money if that meant they would also hurt the out-group member by giving the out-group member less money. Is this making sense to you guys? So again, not rational and fairly hostile. Why do you suppose this is happening, by the way? I mean, what could be the only explanation for this phenomenon? Again, it sort of comes down to this self-esteem explanation, right? What else could explain why we would do this, except for the phenomenon by which we tend to believe and desire to believe that our own group members are better, that my group is better than your group, because that makes me feel better about myself. You know, this was just one of many studies. Another example of this type of study was a minimal group paradigm, was where participants were asked to evaluate dots, and they were asked to just basically guess how many dots they see on a computer screen. And afterwards, they're randomly assigned to either be told that they're underestimators or overestimators, that they tend to overestimate versus underestimate. And afterwards, again, we find this bias whereby participants will distribute rewards in terms of to in-group versus out-group members differentially by basically giving more money to in-group members than to out-group members. Again, at ways, even if that meant they were going to get less money themselves. If it meant they were going to hurt the out-group member, they were actually better with that than if they were going to help the out-group member. Does this make sense? I remember actually one of my friends in college just came back from a Psych 100 experiment and said, they told me I was an overestimator. And then at the debriefing part said that was just a lie. So apparently she had participated in one of these types of minimal groups type of paradigms. Probably wasn't this one, but it probably was a paradigm spin-off of this. But we should talk about the extent to which we can see this in our own day-to-day lives. Do you find, for instance, that really meaningless groups start to influence the ways in which we interact with people? I can give you one example of things that I've seen. Any PC users? Your PC users? Any Mac users? Anyone find that there's some hostility between the PC owners and the Mac owners? Seems fairly arbitrary to me, but it manifests in real ways. Oh, really? You don't like me because I use this kind of computer? Okay. I wouldn't even tell you what kind of computer I have, because then half of you guys will think I'm inferior, right? But what sorts of things have you guys noticed that seem arguably minimal? Yeah.
Well, I'm a music major, so obviously there's that. But like depending on which instrument, but like always playful, but there's like a lot of like competition and kind of like, well, obviously the string studio is the best studio and you should be jealous. And the brass players are like, no, because we're better. So it's just kind of like this is an argument between like what instrument you play, which is silly because a lot of us play more than the choir. So
Oh, absolutely. I remember as an Ohio State student, you know they have a famous all-brass band, right? Well, I was a woodwind player, and I was really into music as well, and so I joined the pep band, where they allowed woodwinds to play, right? So I remember practicing, and when the woodwinds had to do their own little thing, hissing was going on in the brass set. They were hissing at us. It's like, are you serious? They really hated woodwinds. It was not a joke.
Okay, I'm not into it at all, but I was in class between girls about team effort and
Absolutely, right? That's relevant. That's coming out, what, today? Last night? Okay. Excellent, yeah. Align yourself with one or the other. That's a good one. Any other minimal groups? Yeah.
Just like a couple days ago, me and my friend almost got in like a very passive-aggressive argument over two teams that neither one of us were in any like affiliated with, not the school that we go to, right? And I left, like I said, like we were perfect. You talk about it before. I was like, I gotta go. I gotta do my work somewhere else.
It's become too irritated. I
It
can't.
doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah, it takes on sort of a different life of its own almost. It's, yeah, it's
I was gonna say like especially
okay, so differences of opinions in terms of who's going to get the room. So even while you're watching sitcoms, like just differences in terms of what we think is going to happen. I see. Or, okay. And the people who own them are superior, right? Absolutely. Again, sort of doesn't necessarily make sense, but we can see it influence our behaviors in these really interesting ways. And I think it's something we need to keep in mind since it turns out to affect us. I think because of this research, I try to really kind of hide a certain preference. I try to make it clear, or I try to not necessarily always share my particular attitudes because I could be offending or alienating myself from the other half of the people listening that I don't agree with you and therefore you are bad. But something to think about. terms of interacting with others. And how I think we can see this now, especially if we're aware of this research, in funny ways. Of course, we'll talk about more serious consequences as well. An additional phenomenon, I don't know if you guys are aware of this illusory correlation. You guys heard of an illusory correlation? Something that you probably will start to notice if you haven't heard of it so far. Basically, what it is that the perception of a stronger association between two variables than actually exists. Now the question is, when does this happen? It turns out this is more likely to happen, this illusory correlation is more likely to happen when we're dealing with minority events or minority individuals, groups. Right? So this illusory correlation is more likely to happen when we're perceiving minority groups, right? Like a minority of events. Let me put this, I'll give you guys some concrete examples because I think this is kind of abstract. One concrete example of this is white people's perceptions of the welfare rates of African Americans. It turns out that white people tend to overestimate the proportion of African Americans who are on welfare. They actually underestimate the proportion of white people who are on welfare. So the question is, why is this happening? Well, it turns out because there are fewer, literally smaller numbers of African Americans in the United States, for instance, than there are Caucasians, that each event, both being African American and being on welfare, turns out to be distinctive and readily accessible and comes to mind more easily. It's more easily retrieved from memory, is one potential explanation. And then people use those events as evidence of a relationship that is stronger than it is with reality. Let me give you another example. This, by the way, this can work with minority group members. It can work also with minority events. So another minority event is child sexual abuse. It happens. Approximately 1 in 5 women, 1 in 10 men are sexually abused as kids. But it's a minority event, right? So it's not 4 in 5, it's 1 in 5, right? So it's a smaller proportion of people who are abused than who are not abused, right? But we've also got another minority event. Again, this isn't that much of a minority, but mental health problems, right? Turns out fewer people currently suffer from mental health problems than do not. So mental illness, essentially. So it turns out people tend to significantly overestimate the relationship between child sexual abuse and adult mental illness than there really exists, right? It turns out, yeah, there is a relationship, there is a correlation, but it's by no means perfect. And lots of people who weren't sexually abused have mental illness, and lots of people who were sexually abused don't have mental illness. But because both of those events are minority-related events, we tend to significantly overestimate the proportion of covariance between them. And we know we do this even when we're dealing with events for which we have no preconceptions. Because you could certainly imagine, well, my stereotypes, my negative stereotypes about African Americans could cause this as well. Or my stereotypes about individuals who were abused. Well, certainly I would think that that would be a genetic event that would cause mental illness. But, for instance, in one study, what participants were asked to do were simply to look at a computer screen that shows a series of circles and a series of squares. Okay? In one situation, there were approximately, 12 circles and 4 squares. In another situation, they were shown circles and squares, but in that situation, it was only 6 circles and 2 squares. Right? Now, I think I got this math right. The proportion of circles to squares should be identical in both scenarios, right? Is that making sense to you? But under what circumstance do you believe that participants would overestimate the number of squares that they see, according to an illusory correlation? Again, when do we do this? When is this illusory correlation more likely to happen? When there are minority events. So So it turns out when there were only 6 circles and 2 squares, participants were more likely to overestimate the number of squares that they saw relative to the majority situation where we're dealing with a larger group of events in general. Is this making sense? So even though there were actually more squares in that group than in this group, and even though the proportions were identical, participants overestimated the proportion of squares when they were dealing with a minority set of events than when they were dealing with a majority set of events, right? A larger set of events. Is this making sense to you guys? Again, it just illustrates this illusory correlation. When we're dealing with smaller numbers, minority events within those numbers are particularly noticeable and memorable. We tend to overestimate the proportion of them. Is this making sense? To give you a concrete example, what is that show? It is where Japanese men compete in a obstacle course. Ninja Warrior. Have you guys seen this? Okay, I was not watching it, but I heard my husband and my father laughing hysterically, like really loud, and then raving about it from the other. They were watching in the other room, and then my husband was telling me about it in the car ride home, and he was like, "Oh, you should have seen it. It was just amazing. You know, these Japanese men would come out, they look totally normal, and then they take off their shirts and they're just ripped, and then they compete in this event, and I remember him saying, yeah, it was just surprising to me that so many Japanese people are so fit. It's just amazing. And I was like, it's not as if all Japanese people are totally ripped underneath their shirts, right? There are very fit Americans, a minority of Americans. There are very fit Japanese, probably more of a minority. But again, sort of that, because to my husband, Japanese individuals, there's a minority. For him, he was sort of overestimating the relationship between incredibly buff Japanese and being Japanese. So I was thinking, illusory correlation. One example of that. I tried to explain that to him, but of course instead. So, yeah. Do you guys try to explain social psychology to your friends and they just get irritated with you? Yes. It can be a problem. All right. So let's move on. Another phenomenon. I enjoyed this little figure. Obviously, this is a challenging task, although I would say this would be a more accurate depiction of the true psychological phenomenon if this guy right here wasn't a penguin, but rather was, I don't know, a sea lion or something. What do you suppose this is supposed to illustrate? Let's say if this guy was a sea lion. Yeah.
That's cultures, they all look the same. Absolutely. All Asian people look the same. They don't. It's just you're not used to it.
Absolutely, right? What this is supposed to illustrate is outgroup homogeneity, right? So what is outgroup homogeneity? It's simply the belief that members of the outgroup are more similar to one another than they really are. And they're more similar than our in-group members are. Us in-group members, we're unique snowflakes. We are distinct and individual. The out-group members are a lot more similar. Not just in terms of what they look like, but in terms of their personality, their things that they enjoy, right? And perhaps the example that I just illustrated to you before was an example of out-group homogeneity. Oh, clearly all Japanese people are ripped under their shirts, right? Also an illusory correlation, right? Okay, so let's talk about research that supports this. First of all, one study showed that just telling participants that they're evaluating students from a different college actually caused outgroup homogeneity. So for instance, in one study, participants from one college were brought into the lab and they were told that they were going to read about Jimmy, who goes to this rival college. Jimmy prefers to listen to jazz music. In a different condition, they were told to evaluate Jimmy, but Jimmy goes to their own college, their own school, right? And they're told Jimmy prefers jazz music. So Jimmy has this preference. The only difference is half the participants are told he goes to the rival school, the other half of the participants are told he goes to their own school. Does this make sense? Afterwards, participants are asked to estimate the proportion of people at their own school and at the rival school who like jazz music. you suppose we would find in that study?
People with others.
Absolutely. So when they are told, they basically are more likely to use the evidence that Jimmy, if he goes to that other school and he likes jazz music, then they're significantly more likely to overestimate the proportion of people at that school who like jazz music. But when they're asked to evaluate Jimmy who goes to their own school and who likes jazz music, they're less likely to do that. So they're less likely to believe that people at my own school are all the same and like all of the same things. Instead, recognize these people are different. This isn't why people are different.
Is the same in collective coaches too?
That's a good question. I am not familiar with cross-cultural research illustrating differences in homogeneity. So to the extent that it generalizes, my bet would be that it does, but that's an empirical question, and I just genuinely don't know that answer. That'd be an interesting thing to study. I would imagine that it would, because we know stereotypes exist wherever we go. Schemas exist and influence, have effects on our behavior in any culture. That's interesting. Any other questions about homogeneity? Good so far? Okay. So an additional phenomenon that is in line or is explained by output homogeneity is what's called the cross-race effect. This is a very pervasive phenomenon in psychological-related research. It's simply that facial recognition is better for same race faces than for different race faces. Okay? So what we've got here are the results of an experiment in which participants are asked to evaluate a crime, to watch a crime, videotape a crime, for instance, and then to try to accurately identify the perpetrator of that crime from a lineup. Now, the independent variable, there are two independent variables. One is whether or not participants are white or black. So here we've got white participants, here we've got black participants. So this is sort of a naturally occurring independent variable. We can't manipulate that. But we did manipulate the race of the perpetrator. So participants either saw a white perpetrator or a black perpetrator, and then they're asked to identify from the lineup what perpetrator they saw. And here you can see clearly this nice crossover effect. White participants are significantly more accurate when they're in a situation where they can identify a white perpetrator, less accurate when they're asked to identify a black perpetrator, and vice versa. Black participants more likely or better able to accurately identify a black perpetrator than a white perpetrator. Does this make sense? Okay, so we know this exists. This exists for all races. Basically, whatever race you're in, you have an easier time discriminating between and identifying, accurately identifying people of your own ethnicity. For instance, Koreans have an easier time picking out and identifying Koreans than they do Caucasians, black people. Likewise, Hispanic people, likewise. Does this make sense? The question is why? Why is this happening? I mean, there's competing explanations.
Is it, have any kind of difference when it's like, they're all Middle Eastern, but they're different kinds of Middle Eastern, or they're all Asian, but they're different kinds of Asian?
That's a good question. I am not familiar. I'll review one study that might speak to that. But generally what we find are Koreans are better at identifying Asians than Caucasians. So we're not lumping in just Koreans for that study. And likewise, there's arguably lots of different types of Caucasians, but Caucasians are better at identifying Caucasians regardless of ethnic background than African Americans. But that's a good question. I'm unfamiliar with the extent to which we really parse it out with the CUIs. But yeah, so what do you guys think is going on here? What do you suppose this is explaining? Well, I mean, there again could be competing explanations for this phenomenon. So because we believe they're all the same, it's harder to tell the difference.